to the weekend, but it won't last. It'll soon cloud over and outbreaks of rain will trickle in. Northern Ireland, though, should cheer up pretty quickly in the morning. Here, by and large, a fine day. Western Scotland also brightening up for Saturday afternoon. And parts of Wales, Northern England and Eastern Scotland will also cheer up through the day. But further south and east, it'll stay pretty glum. Not much rain getting to East Anglia until late in the day, but it will move in here. It will be quite mild, but obviously it won't feel all that mild with the cloud and the rain. That's likely to linger in the southeast and East Anglia during Saturday evening, so bear that in mind if you're heading out for a firework display, for example. Something clearer then arrives, but then so do further showers for Sunday. And Sunday is going to be a mixture of bright spells and showers, some heavy ones across the southeast, certainly initially, and then through the day we'll see heavy showers developing quite widely. Perhaps not many for parts of Scotland, northeast England, and here we'll see some spells of sunshine. But after a brief lull, the winds will also pick up, so a blustery day. It will again be mild, though, with temperatures in the south into the teens.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's exactly 4 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Well, we start with a developing story. A number of British citizens have been caught up in a hostage situation in South America. The Foreign Office says it's in contact with local authorities in Peru, where a small group of British nationals are involved in an incident. It's understood a tourist boat has been caught up in a protest. Well, we'll bring you more on that story as we get it. In other news, a series of planned rail strikes has been suspended. The industrial action by RMT members was due to begin tomorrow, but the union says it's secured unconditional talks on Network Rail and the promise of a pay offer. The RMT says the dispute is ongoing and it will still reballot its members on new strike action, with the result being published on the 15th of November. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, as many as 4,000 people were being held at the facility in Kent, when it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. Number 10 says the Home Office is looking at what more can be done about the capacity at the processing centre. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February. A new energy scheme that pays households to cut their electricity use during peak times has been revealed. The new demand flexibility service has been given the approval by energy regulator Ofgem and will run until March next year. The National Grid electricity system operator says a typical household could save up to £100, but you need to have a smart meter to take part. The scheme is also being put in place to avoid blackouts this winter. Well, strike action by hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport could affect football fans heading to the World Cup in Qatar. The Unite Union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. They include ground handling and cargo staff. The World Cup kicks off in just over 2 weeks' time, and the union says it expects Qatar Airways to be hit heavily by the action. Kevin Hall, regional officer at Unite Union, says there's no point to striking if it isn't effective.
I think it's unreasonable to expect our members to be able to achieve an inflation pay rise. Because let's be perfectly honest about it, even if they were to achieve that sort of pay rise and keep their pay in line with inflation, it will do nothing at all for the cost of living crisis that is affecting them. With the energy bills, the food, petrol, it will do nothing.
Twitter continues with its mass sackings as part of its major restructuring under new owner Elon Musk. Reports suggest as many as half of the firm's global workforce could be laid off as part of cost-cutting measures. Employees have been told they'll receive an email by 4 p.m. telling them whether or not they've lost their job. Offices have been temporarily closed and the access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as the company tries to cut costs by £1 billion annually. Pakistan's former Prime Minister says he'll take to the streets of Islamabad once again when he's recovered from being shot in the leg. Imran Khan claims 2 gunmen had tried to assassinate him yesterday, opening fire at an anti-government protest he was leading in the capital of Pakistan. Speaking from a hospital in Lahore, the 73-year-old says 1 person was killed and 11 others injured in Thursday's attack. He has no evidence for his allegations. The Prime Minister has told a COP27 reception there'll be more human suffering if climate change continues to ravage the planet. King Charles hosted the event at Buckingham Palace, inviting more than 200 people, including business figures and environmentalists. The reception comes ahead of next week's summit in Egypt, which the King will miss, but Rishi Sunak is now attending after a U-turn. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's return to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon. It's just fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It's U-turn galore at Tory Party HQ. I mean, they'll basically say anything to get you to vote for them because once they're in power, there's not much you can do about it. But why U-turn on the pledge to axe smart motorways? Despite the fact that Rishi Sunak said smart motorways are unpopular because they are unsafe and that we need to listen to drivers, be on their side and stop the pursuit of policies that go against common sense. The new Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, has stated that whilst he would continue with the current pause in the rollout of these, in my view, death traps, that they will continue to gather evidence to decide whether or not to roll out any more. Even though it is pretty clear that there are numerous opportunities for error and that a coroner has warned that the public need to alert the authorities if someone breaks down because no one may be watching. The concept, in my view, has clearly been put together by someone at home on their computer, someone who's never driven before. You see, what's supposed to happen is that the radar technology and the cameras and the little X's over the lanes, backed up with a fully manned call centre at an eye-watering cost, by the way, will trigger a series of events that would ensure your safety if you are unfortunate enough to break down on one of these things, and that intermittent hard shoulders will be placed within a certain distance so that, if need be, you can limp to them in safety. However, half the stuff planned hasn't been installed, and often, even where it has, the software has been known to fail. And those intermittent hard-to-find shoulders are in many cases further apart than was agreed. You see, unfortunately, smart motorways aren't that clever. They rely heavily on somebody in a call centre somewhere seeing the incident on a camera and initiating the chain of events. But it would be just your luck that they've popped out for a loo break when an incident occurs. It is so obviously nonsense. Why on earth do we need to investigate them further? This was such an easy win for the Conservatives. You'd think, under the current circumstances with the economy, they would see sense. OK, Mark, I challenge you to deliberately feign a breakdown on a smart motorway, say one on the M1 where Sally Jacobs was killed in 2019 after a car broke down. Or what about near the spot where Claire Mercer lost her husband? How about you rely on law-abiding public to make a call whilst driving to get help to you instead of you just simply pulling into a hard shoulder? Come on, Mark. What do you rate your chances of survival on that one? Take your family in the car as well. You see, which one would you prefer to break down on? A smart motorway or one with a good old hard shoulder to cry on? Well, that's what I thought. It's a no-brainer. Ask yourself, Mark, which one would you prefer to break down on? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are the middle class the biggest victims of the economic crisis? We'll be doing that. That is on the way. But if you just joined me, welcome on board. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. So before we get stuck into the debate, loads of things going on. So the Great British Debate, I'm asking you, are the middle class the biggest victims of the economic crisis? Now, according to the reports, the Chancellor is considering to raise capital gains tax. Now, this is, of course, in a bid to curb the economic crisis. Landlords have also been hit. The idea, of course, claiming that they've been feeling the financial squeeze since 2019. This all begs the question, are the middle class the ones suffering the most from the Chancellor's fiscal policies, even though he said those with the widest shoulders will take the biggest burden? And then at 4:50 in Health Watch, a blood test has been developed that can detect cancer at the early stages. Now, scientists say that the test has the capability of detecting 70 different types of cancer before it spreads. Now, this has been called a game changer. Do not miss that. That is on Health Watch later. Then at 5 o'clock, Friday Focus. The question is, who is in charge of the NHS and how on earth are they spending our money? Now, the Public Accounts Committee took senior health officials to task over long patient waiting lists as well as NHS spending. I'll be speaking to Conservative MP Mark Francois, who was on the panel grilling the Department of Health over the bureaucratic nature of healthcare and who is really in charge of the NHS. That is the question. Here he is asking Amanda Pritchard, head of NHS England, on a salary of over 200k, that very question.
Who is in charge of the NHS?
Do you mean for the NHS as a arm's length body? That's me.
Right.
Or do you mean who am I accountable to?
No, I asked you who was in charge. That's you.
Yes.
Not ministers. Thank you.
The accountability arrangement is very clear. It's to Parliament, to government, and that's why we work so closely.
They say in quiz shows, we'll take your first answer. Thank you very much.
Yes, but you also have to recognise where the accountability lies.
I think, if I may say so, I think you've just given the whole game away.
No, Mr. Francois, but I think it is...
Worrying, isn't it? Now, that's coming up in the next hour. Stay with me, you won't want to miss that. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming back, Kevin.
Thank you for inviting me back.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And nice to see you.
We're old mates, so it's nice to be together for a bit.
Oh, it's lovely, lovely. Right, so what do you think then? Smart motorways. I'm going to start with you, Christine.
I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. You said that they'd been developed by a child on a computer. It's the sort of stuff that you would get out of Yes Minister or something like that. They are absolutely lethal. And, OK, they were apparently a cost-cutting exercise because they cost £8 million per mile to do a smart motorway, and they cost £75 million per mile to do an extra lane on the motorway. So on a cost basis, it's a no-brainer. But, as you said, all the technology, etc., etc., and what price a life, anyway? I mean, they are madness, absolute madness. And apparently the RAC and the AA will not go to an accident unless that lane has been cut off by the person who may have gone to the loo just when you happen to break down. So although you might ring your breakdown assistance, they're not going to be able to get to you if the lane hasn't been cut off. It's unbelievable. It is such a stupid idea. And as you started your monologue, yet another U-turn by this government.
Why?
Mind-blowing.
It seems ridiculous, Kevin. Have you ever been broken down the smart motorway, and what's your view on that?
No, thankfully not. But I notice when I'm on one, there isn't a hard shoulder, and you kind of think about it, because the answer to your question, where would you rather break down? You'd rather break down with a hard shoulder. But, right?
What is the advantage?
I can't wait to hear this.
If you reinstate all those hard shoulders, you will lose a lane, and then you will slow the traffic, and then you will get bigger jams. And also, we go on dual carriageways, sometimes which can be up to 3 lanes. I've been on dual carriageways, and Dual says 2, but they're up to 3, and you're doing 60 miles an hour, sometimes 70, and there's no hard shoulder.
Well,
I'd like to see the real evidence. I'd like to see the scientific evidence, the number of deaths by the number of cars going in that area with hard shoulders, without hard shoulders, because unfortunately, when we travel fast in cars, people will always die. Now, are these deaths because of the smart motorway, or were they just on a smart motorway?
Well, do you know, it's interesting you say that, and I hear the point about the dual carriageway. The thing with the dual carriageway, first of all, there are 2 lanes, so that's already 1 less than on a motorway.
There is usually a lane, an inside area.
There is. And also, the issue with them is that they followed the rules. So the nature of the distance between the intermittent hard shoulders, they followed a certain distance apart, and they've... Unfortunately, with the smart motorways, they understand that you're going to be in 3 to 4 lanes, that you're going to be travelling faster, so it's far more dangerous. And also, you've got the thing, obviously got, this is where obviously all the big lorries and all those kind of traffic will go. And so I think it's imperative there's another...
The other thing is, I mean, I've written all these things down. There's the dynamic hard shoulder, the controlled hard shoulder, and the all-lane hard. The controlled hard shoulder seems to be the most dangerous, because you never know whether it's in or out, as it were. You don't know whether it is the hard shoulder or whether it's... you know, a bit of the smart... It's confusing enough on a motorway when people are whizzing around, but surely on a dual carriageway, I mean, I take that point, but most dual carriageways, there is a certain area on the left.
No, I don't think there is, but there's normally more roads on and off than on a motorway.
So you can limp off.
But I would really like... I mean, I can't see why the Department of Transport can't produce this in a couple of weeks or a month. The evidence, the real data. Look, you can do it. How many cars, you know, per hour? How many breakdowns? How many deaths? They can number crunch all this very quickly.
They have done this, and it turned out that the figures were slightly fudged in the way they'd done it. So it initially appeared that the smart motorways were safer, but in comparison to the quantity, if you did it proportionally, they aren't safer. And also common sense would tell you that they're not safe.
And there is a dirty secret in government, or actually all big companies, cost-benefit analysis. They know certain decisions will have certain implications, results, conclusions, and they make a calculation. Are they worth it? Is it worth getting rid of hard shoulders so everyone can get along a bit quicker, and then a few more people will die in a year? I mean, that's what they do.
That's what, apparently, according to Mark Harper, is going to happen over the next 5 years. They're going to assess all this and come up with...
Why are we waiting? See, that's the thing. And also, see, what it was, last year, I think it was last year, we've only been on air for just over a year. It was last year. Last year, there was a report in one of the papers, and basically the Dynac software, which is what they use to control everything, the people in the call centre had actually renamed it DyNow. And it wasn't the software that was actually failing so much, but it was more the fact that other elements were failing, which which meant that the software couldn't work as effectively. So it wasn't actually the Dynex software that was to blame, but there were other elements. But they've renamed it Dynow because they were scared. Then there was reports saying they were scared because they realised these are people's lives. And so if I'm to travel on the smart motorway, I'm looking and thinking, well, is somebody checking on the cameras? Is the software failing? Does the camera actually work? There's the radar technology. Is that actually in operation? A lot of the time it wasn't.
Horrific if there is no refuge.
Yeah.
If you've just basically got to stop in a lane. Presumably, if you can get to the left-hand lane, but there is nothing stopping the cars coming other than possibly lights or gantries if they're placed in the correct position and people are following them. While if there is a hard shoulder, you are off the main floor of the traffic. Doesn't mean some people don't then get hit by cars or lorries that stray into hard shoulders.
But the chances
not perfect. Yeah, you would fancy your chances much.
And with your family in the car as well. I've got two children, one's 5, one's 14. I mean, they can't get out.
You were talking about the technology failing. There was an incident, I think it was on the M1, when apparently all the technology was supposed to be covering anybody who'd broken down in the smart motorway lane. For 7 hours, there was no technology covering that at all, and that included a rush hour. Now, I know technology can fail in all sorts of places, and aeroplanes crash, etc., but it seems to me that the cost-benefit analysis, as you said, hasn't been properly done.
Well, get out of your car, get over that barrier, but I can see why no one will want to come on the AA or the RAC green flag or anyone will want to come along and stop in the middle of a moving motor.
Well, nobody would. Why would you? How can you? And what do you do? They say, what was that advert that says go to the left or whatever? There's an ad going on that just says you go to the left or something. And it's like, well, look, if you're stuck in the fast lane and you're in the motorway and you've got kids in the car and stuff like that, you're a sitting duck.
Yeah, mind if you're stuck in the fast lane, that would be the case, even if there's a hard shoulder and you can't get across. I mean, that's
just
terrible if you have a blowout or you hit a barrier or somebody.
But I suppose, yes, that is that. But the point is that you have nowhere to go. So if my car is breaking down and I'm in the fast lane, usually I've been able to go off to the left to the hard shoulder and get into the hard shoulder. What I'm saying is if you are breaking down, do you just stop where you are? Are you less safe in the slow lane with the lorries? Or are you safer in the fast lane where cars are behind you? I mean, and then you could be there for a long time.
Go left and every...
Yeah, but there's the lorries. The lorries can't stop as quickly.
Actually, the beauty of a lorry is the driver is high up. They're more likely to see you than a car. I think lorry drivers overall are better than car drivers.
Well, if you hit by one, there's no chance.
Motorways are apparently the safest form of transport. Let's remember that. But how can Rishi Sunak say during the leadership campaign, you quoted it, that smart motorways are unpopular because they're unsafe? He described them as death traps. So what the hell is he doing, even contemplating more death traps?
Oh, he's decided he's not. He's not tied to anything he's ever said before. So
well, he said he said basically he was talking about common sense. So, our eyes define them as death traps, but he basically said that obviously it's common sense to not kind of have them. So
common sense is have a hard shoulder.
Common sense
says no to smart motorways.
Common sense says no to smart motors. We all say no to smart motors. It's ridiculous. And they're going to spend money on some sort of other investigation and then hacking that out for 5 years. No, just get rid of them. And Mark Harper, I'm serious. Give it a go. See whether you like it. Right, if you've just joined me, welcome. It's just coming up to 20 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. After the break, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking you, are the middle class the biggest victims of the economic crisis? Now, according to reports, the Chancellor is considering to raise capital gains tax. Now, that's the profit you earn on the sale of an asset. And all of that is in a bid to balance the books. Now, landlords have slammed the idea, claiming that they've been suffering financially since 2019. And this all begs the question, are the middle class the ones suffering the most from the Chancellor's economic policies? What do you think? Are you suffering? Send me your thoughts. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell me what you think. You can also send me a tweet at GBNews. I've got a poll up right now asking, are the middle class the biggest victims of the economic crisis? Cast your vote now, but first, let's get some weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many of us having a fine Friday, but tomorrow will bring something different, much more cloud and outbreaks of rain, although it will brighten up in many places by the afternoon. The cloud and rain courtesy of this really brutal-looking area of low pressure. That itself is staying away, but these weather fronts are drifting towards us. They're not with us yet, however. We still have this little ridge of high pressure, bringing most a fine Friday evening. Turning a little chilly out there, and it's not completely dry. There are a few scattered showers over northwest England, north and west Wales and the far north of Scotland. The showers tend to fade and many places will be dry for most of the night, but here come the weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland and Wales by dawn. Before that arrives, it will turn quite cold in the east with a few pockets of frost likely, certainly in northeast Scotland in the countryside. A dry start then across the extreme east to the weekend, but it won't last. It'll soon cloud over and outbreaks of rain will trickle in. Northern Ireland, though, should cheer up pretty quickly in the morning. Here, by and large, a fine day. Western Scotland also brightening up for Saturday afternoon. And parts of Wales, northern England and eastern Scotland will also cheer up through the day. But further south and east, it'll stay pretty glum. Not much rain getting to East Anglia until late in the day, but it will move in here. It will be quite mild, but obviously it won't feel all that mild with the cloud and the rain. That's likely to linger in the southeast and East Anglia during Saturday evening, so bear that in mind if you're heading out for a firework display, for example. Something clearer then arrives, but then so do further showers for Sunday. And Sunday is going to be a mixture of bright spells and showers, some heavy ones across the southeast, certainly initially, and then through the day we'll see heavy showers developing quite widely. Perhaps not many for parts of Scotland, northeast England, and here we'll see some spells of sunshine. But after a brief lull, the winds will also pick up, so a blustery day. It will again be mild, though, with temperatures in the south into the teens.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
It's just coming up to 25 minutes after 4 o'clock. Welcome on board. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Don't forget, you can also download the GB News app where you can check out all the programmes. I'm Nana Akua. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are the middle class the biggest victims from the economic crisis? Now, you heard them saying that those with the widest shoulders would shoulder the biggest burden. But is that in actual fact the truth? The Bank of England announced that interest rates would continue to increase by an additional 0.75%. Now, that takes it up to 3%. That is the biggest rise since 1989. The Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, also said that September's mini-budget had damaged the country's standing internationally, as the bank warns that the UK is facing its longest recession since records began. Although I struggle to imagine that just one thing, one budget, would destroy the international stance of this country. It must have been over time. No wonder who's been in power since then and who was in charge of the purse strings then. Now, this comes as the Chancellor, Hunt, also sets out to raise the capital gains tax to fill the £50 billion hole in the nation's finances. That took time for that one. The rise in interest rates, high inflation and increases in taxes are said to be hitting all social classes, but are the middle class the worst off, rather than those who, I imagine, have the broadest shoulders? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are the middle class the biggest victims of this economic crisis? Well, I'm joined now by former Labour Party advisor Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, welcome on board. Scarlett, thank you for joining me. Why do you think that the working class or middle class, who do you think is the worst off on this budget? Who comes off the worst?
Well, I mean, clearly the poorest are the worst hit by this economic crisis. I mean, we talk about mortgage rates, which mainly hits the middle class. Certainly in the South, mainly hits the middle classes of those who can afford to buy their own homes. But actually, for a lot of people who are living in privately rented accommodation, mortgage rates going up will hit the landlords, and the landlords will put up the rent. So there is no question. But I mean, the biggest economic crisis is inflation on food, and the bottom 10% spend as a proportion of their income twice as much on food as the top 10%, and then there's gas and electricity, which is a complete nightmare.
You said the top 10%. Where did you find those figures from? Just to remind me of what you just said. The top 10%.
The bottom 10% as a proportion of their income spend twice as much money on food. I mean, it makes sense, right? You have to have food. Food's more expensive. If you're better paid, if you're well off, if you're in the top 10%, you're not going to spend so much of your income on food. I mean, if you're poor, we know, I mean, during the summer, this was before the electricity prices and gas prices went up, people were talking about heating or eating. People were going to food banks and saying, no, don't give me potatoes because I have to cook them. I need things that I don't have to cook because I can't afford the gas or the electricity. There's no question that everybody is going to be hit by this financial crisis. Absolutely no question at all. And the middle classes are going to do very badly. But frankly, the people who are going to be really, really hit are the worst off, as always.
You think, all right, Scarlett, stay right there. I'm going to have a quick chat to political commentator Suzanne Evans. Suzanne, thank you very much for joining me. Suzanne, now, the government was saying that those with the broadest shoulders should bear the brunt of this. But it seems the middle class seem to be bearing the brunt of all of this. Scarlett thinks it's those who are worst off. Is that your view, or do you have a different opinion on that?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Scarlett said there. I think 9 out of 10 households, if you look at various surveys that have been done on the cost of living crisis, are saying that they are feeling the pinch and finding it very difficult or more difficult to get by. But is the burden falling on the broadest shoulders? No, of course it isn't. The fact is, in a cost of living crisis, the wealthiest people in society are really not going to feel the brunt of it very much. The poorest in society, of course, and Scarlett's absolutely right, the increase in food inflation, one of the most fundamental costs for anyone, has gone up so much. I think it's gone up around 15%, and inevitably that is going to cut into disposable income. Of course it is. But it's those middle classes that really do get squeezed, because there is help out there for the poorest in society. You might argue it's not enough, but the fact is we do have a very good welfare and benefit system in this country, and if you fall below a certain income threshold, you can access quite a lot of support. But if you're middle class, it's much more difficult. So, for instance, we've now got, I think, around 6 million people who have now been pushed into a higher tax bracket, into the 40% tax bracket in the past few years. That's the biggest number we've ever had, because it hasn't really kept pace with inflation. So more of those people are going to be paying more tax, but not really feeling the benefit of being in that higher tax bracket. We also know that even when you look at people...
Let's bring Scarlett back in. Suzanne, let's bring Scarlett back in, because I want to bring you both back in. Because Scarlett was saying that actually she thinks that the worst off are hit the worst. I don't tend to agree with that. I think that the middle class are hit worse, frankly, because those worst off actually have help out there, as Suzanne was saying. I mean, would you not hear that...
Nana, they don't have a lot of help. I mean, we're talking about people like nurses going to food banks. We're talking, I mean, food banks no longer have enough food because the people who used to give money to food banks are now going to them. So we're not just talking about people on benefits. We're talking about people who really don't earn very much money. And the gas, the electricity, the food, their rent. You know, I mean, remember the rent goes up. If the landlords have to pay more money, the rent goes up. I mean, it just isn't. Of course, the middle classes will be hit, and they.
But I think you slightly proved your own point, though. As you said, the middle classes are now the ones going to the food banks as well, and not only that, but they'll be hit in several places as well. Susanna, I mean, in my view, who do you think is worse to hit with this? Do you think it's the middle class, or do you think it's the poorer that are hit, even though they spend a larger portion of their income? Those in the middle don't get anything. They don't get any help.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is, in this particular crisis, definitely the middle classes. And I'd argue that nurses are probably middle class, actually, to be honest. You know, some nurses' salaries hit that middle class bracket. You're more senior in the NHS. You can be on a potentially extremely good salary. And of course, some nurses actually do private sector, private hospital work as well to boost their NHS salary, and they're allowed to do that. So I don't think that's the best example, to be honest. What we're finding is food banks, anecdotally, are saying that the people who used to be bringing in food to the food banks are now the ones actually coming in and needing that support. Even people earning £60,000 plus a year, which might seem like a large salary, are struggling. There's been a 13% increase in approaches to debt helplines from people earning more than £60,000 a year. And if you think about it, if you set yourself a certain lifestyle, you might have public school education for your children, you might have a commute that's expensive because you live quite a distance away from where you work. You've perhaps got a bigger home, so you've got bigger energy bills, your mortgage has gone up, your rent is likely to be higher. I'm not saying that we aren't all struggling, but I think for the middle class families, it must have come as a heck of a shock. And if you're having to sort of make a decision about whether to sell your home because you can no longer afford the mortgage, take your child out of the school that they're very happy at, it's not a pleasant situation whatsoever.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your thoughts. Susan Evans, political commentator, and also Scarlett Maguire, former Labour Party advisor. Right, well, if you've just joined me, welcome. It's coming up to 34 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. Now, still to come, we continue with the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, are the middle class the biggest victims of the economic crisis? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Then at 5, in Friday Focus, the Public Accounts Committee took senior health officials to task over long patient waiting lists as well as NHS spending. I'll be speaking to Conservative MP Mark Francois, who was on the panel, grilling the department over the way it dealt with patient care since the pandemic. All of that on the way after your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Nana. It's 4:34. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. A series of planned rail strikes has been suspended. 3 days of industrial action by RMT members was due to begin tomorrow, but the union says it secured unconditional talks on Network Rail and the promise of a pay offer. The RMT says the dispute is ongoing and it will still reballot members on fresh strikes. The results will be published on the 15th of November. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, the facility held as many as 4,000 people. It's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. The Home Office says it's looking at what more can be done about overcrowding at the facility. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. And the Prime Minister has told a COP27 reception there'll be more human suffering if climate change continues to ravage the planet. King Charles hosted the event at Buckingham Palace, inviting more than 200 people, including business figures and environmentalists. It comes ahead of next week's summit in Egypt, which the King will miss, but Rishi Sunak is now attending after announcing a U-turn. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Nana's back in a moment.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Good afternoon, this is GB News. We are the People's Channel. If you've just joined me, where have you been? I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on Great British Radio. Well, we are actually. This is, of course, time for the Great British Debate. And I'm asking, are the Tories becoming Labour in disguise? The Bank of England announced that interest rates would continue to increase by an additional 0.75%, taking it to 3%, the biggest rise since 1989. And the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, also said that September's mini-budget had damaged the country's standing internationally, as the bank warns that the UK is facing its longest recession since records began. So, for the Great British Debate, I'm suggesting that the Tories are becoming a Labour Party in disguise. I'm asking you this: are the middle class the biggest victims of this economic crisis? Now, before we speak to my panel, let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Charlie says home owners will be hard hit, and that covers a wide range of lifestyles and incomes. I think higher earners will be OK. The poor will also be badly hit. Fiona says they'll certainly be hit the hardest for tax hikes. However, I'd say that those that can't afford to heat their homes and eat properly are the hardest hit in reality. Excuse me. But Rob says, yes, their pensions will be robbed to pay for the greedy union demands. Right, well, let's see what my panel make of all of that as well. I'm joined now by Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Right, Kevin, well, I put it to you that the Tory party are fast turning into the Labour Party in disguise with what they've just done, in particular the latest sort of raid on the middle class. And
no,
those,
look, they crashed
at
the
bottom
economy,
end.
and that's Labour's strongest attack line now on the Conservatives will be you crashed the economy, because they tried to bung a load of cash to those at the very top. Labour wouldn't have done that, so everybody's paying. And Labour, when they build through the welfare state, try and include everybody. The Tories take out the middle classes. I wonder why the Tories vote for the middle class vote for the Tories, because they keep getting screwed by them now. The poorest and those on lower incomes are going to be hit hard. Everyone's going to face 10% inflation, although it is 14% for the lowest, because they spend more of their money on food, as we heard in that debate. But if you're in the middle class, well, a few years ago you lost your child benefit if you're a parent. If you earned over $60,000 a year, you used to get that. It starts to be cut from $50,000, and they will just go after you. And they almost rely and take the middle class vote for granted. And most middle class people rely on public services too. They want decent education, because 93% of kids go to the real public schools, state schools, and they rely on the health service, and they're being run down too. So now I think, look, the middle class has been hit hard and has really been squeezed. We have a squeezed middle, and they're being squeezed horribly. But the worst pain will be felt further down the income scale. It will be the poorest and lower income earners.
Because they did say that those with the broadest shoulders would take the most of the burden.
But that should be...
But that's just not true.
No, but that should be those who are really rich or big corporations.
Well, exactly, the corporations.
Or the Amazons of this world who don't pay tax. So those were the broad... Right, if you're going to raise taxes, I could see why you would raise it on somebody on 50,000 rather than 25,000 or 15,000. That I get.
Well, you get more.
But I will accept that somebody on 50,000 isn't super wealthy. Although if you earn, I think, just over 80,000, you're in about the top 5% of income earners. We have a problem in this country. We have a lot of low pay, and people don't do as well as they should. Wages have been squeezed for some years now.
I mean, this term middle class, it's pretty flexible, isn't it? And you've got people at either end of it who sort of drop in, drop out. So it's when you talk about are the middle classes, what exactly do you mean? But yes, they are the ones who are going to get squeezed. And if the Tories rely on them, just like the Tories always rely on the pensioners too, but they're in danger of losing the pensioners' vote. So you can't rely on anybody. And I think you started the section by saying, is the Tory party turning into the Labour Party? Well, it is more and more. I mean, Rishi Sunak is the least Conservative Prime Minister.
And they're incompetent. Labour was... Labour
you're talking about the Labour Party?
Labour made mistakes in power, unquestionably, but never as incompetent as the Tories.
I don't know.
But it's their tax-taking policies. I mean, this is where I think Liz Truss, the blessed Liz Truss, was right. We should be cutting taxes. Every time you cut taxes, the income... You mentioned the top...
There's not that link.
There is that link.
That Laffer curve from the US has been laughed out of court.
No.
Well, I mean, the Tories all over the papers today, they're going to raise capital gains tax. Well, I mean, I've done a bit of research on the figures. I mean, in 1988, Lawson increased it from 30 to 40%. Revenues halved. Ireland, in 1997, they reduced it from 40 to 20. Yield trebled.
To some extent,
the yield comes up.
If you work for a living, you've got to pay your income tax and you can't shift it. If you're wealthy, you're going to have an accountant and you can shift money between years to get around it. If you look at what Rishi Sunak's just done and put up corporation tax 19 to 25%, still low compared to major economies, he's going to get an extra 18 billion a year from it because he's going to get more tax. He wouldn't have got an extra 18 billion by reducing it. I mean, even he's a Thatcherite fiscal conservative, has laughed that out. If you cut the top rate of income tax from 45 to 40 for those on 150, it was going to cost the government $2.5 billion. It wasn't going to make extra tax because all of a sudden all those people are going to say, hey, let's work a lot harder. The truth is, if you're getting more money for what you're doing now, you might even work a bit less. But the question of capital gains tax, I've always thought it's wrong anyway. Now, why on capital gains tax, which you might be selling shares, do you only pay tax depending on your band between 10 and 20%? Well, if you're grafting, whether you're a nurse or a teacher or a plumber or on a building site, you pay 20 or 40% tax. Why should those people sitting back getting capital gains tax pay a lower rate than those who are sweating?
One thing is definitely certain is that the people at the very top of the scale will always find a way around everything because they can employ tax experts. So they're not going to be worried. And if they're really worried, then they'll go abroad, which is another problem. But an awful lot of middle-income people, pensioners, etc., they have maybe a small buy-to-let place, which is their pension pot. They're going to be squeezed out of existence. And one of the callers said earlier that if the people who own the properties are squeezed out, then that's going to tumble down to rents as well. So it affects everybody. And there is a limit, and there'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back if the government isn't careful.
Well, there is a point where there is a level where if you increase the tax take so high, the actual tax take goes down.
Well,
so and I think we're reaching it. You can't just keep taxing people to the hilt. And as for capital gains tax, it's a tax on whether you sell something. If you don't sell it, then the tax doesn't come in.
But what we call the tax burden, it's a disputed phrase, but it's a tax burden. The overall proportion of the economy that the government takes in tax, I think it's around 36, 37% at the moment.
Definitely a burden.
Which is the highest since the 1940s.
Yeah.
That is still low. That 36-37% is still low by comparable
it's still the
economies.
highest that we've had for 70 years.
But it is still low. And to some extent, if you want good public services, you've got to pay for them. It's just who pays for them.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is...
And we don't tax.
Yeah, but,
we don't tax wealth
no, but the
and
thing
the highest earners and the most profitable high enough. Instead, the burden's too much on people who are down.
The problem is, though, that no matter how much money we keep pumping into this government, if you look at how they lost money with test and trace, how they're spending money wastefully on the NHS, how they're... I want them to be accountable. I'm happy to pay more tax if the money is spent well. But actually, coming up at 5 o'clock, we'll be talking about the NHS, and we're speaking to Amanda Pritchard, who was talking to Mark Francois in this Public Accounts Committee. And the way they were spending money, the way they were talking about things and passing, it was just awful. So I'm more concerned with the fact that no matter how much you give them, they're still spending it badly.
Mark Francois, who's a Conservative MP, wants to have a word with the party that's been in power in this country for the last 12 years. That's his party. He's got to take part of the responsibility. But he can't just point the fingers at others. He's been in the governing party. He's been a minister in it.
But he's not deciding on the spending actually in the actual department.
Look at the money we threw down the drain during COVID, paying people goodness knows how much just to sit on their bottoms at home and do nothing.
This is why
we've got to get growth going, and one way to get growth going is to cut taxes so that entrepreneurs will invest or they'll create new businesses. That's where it's going to come from. It's not going to come from a few great big companies. It's going to come from, thousands and thousands of individual people deciding that the climate is right and let go for growth.
Well, you need both, don't you? You need lots of people with clever, bright ideas or wanting to set up on their own, and they've got to be encouraged. And then you need big companies, whether it's British Volt, the electric car company, that's in a bit of trouble in Northumberland.
Yeah, but actually, the other thing is, I think that people who benefited from the pandemic, because this is ultimately what we're really paying for, like the Amazons and like the people who government policy meant that we had to use, I think that there should be windfall taxes on them as well, because I don't see why they're getting off scot-free.
There is a case for a COVID tax. All those who made a killing on PPE.
Exactly. I would be taxing those companies.
None of the self-employed people got any of this.
Exactly, and they're going to be punished by this new stuff as well.
Well, it did if you had a tax record, but the problem were people who fell in the gap, that they'd only recently become self-employed.
Also, if it wasn't 50%, if it was less than 50% of what your actual income was, then you didn't get anything either. Well, I'll tell you what, though, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice on, your opportunity to tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Right, where should we go? Should we go to Bristol? Bristol, they've got a lovely zoo there. Let's speak to one of the animals. Lee Harris. I do this to him every time. The joke works 3 times in a row. Lee, what do you think about all of this? Come on, what's going on?
It's a tricky one. I mean, I agree with a lot of what the panel have said. I mean, I do personally think that the middle classes are going to be hit the hardest. I mean, looking at it from an economic point of view, the short to medium term outlook is really gloomy. I mean, it's a bit rubbish. But one thing I think is for certain, the cost of living crisis has definitely intensified, and it's become more far reaching with, mid and high income households and all age groups really feeling the pinch. But yes, I think it's going to hit the middle incomes the hardest. The first wave of the crisis was centred around energy prices. That hits the bottom third of household by income the hardest. There's no doubt about that. But the kind of second wave of this financial crisis is, due to monetary policy, it's probably going to manifest more acutely in mortgages. That translates into a recession, and that hits the middle income households the hardest. But I think, all of us can relate at the moment, especially from my personal... I run a small business, it's just me. My income's dropped dramatically since COVID. Not as many businesses are having websites built. I'm quite lucky that there are still companies that want websites built, so I'm okay at the moment. But, just treading water and, already, especially, I'm lucky I'm not in this situation, but you think about households that have already got really high outgoings, so even before the economic crisis, they were already kind of not uncomfortable, but had very little disposable income from a month-to-month basis. That's gone. I've gone through all of my personal savings, and a lot of other people already. And sadly, I think it is going to get worse before it gets better. But yeah, I think with what a lot of already been said, the middle income section now are going to hit the hardest, especially if we do go into that kind of deep, long recession. I'll tell you, Nana, we should have gone with Liz. We should have gone with Liz's growth plan.
Should have gone with
We've
Liz.
been saying
Is
it all
that the
along.
right idea, for goodness sake?
Absolutely.
Oh, dear, snaky Sunak. Oh, well, never mind. Thank you very much, Lee. Really good to talk to you. That's Lee Harris. He is, of course, our great British voice. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for Health Watch. Scientists have revealed that a blood test has the capability of detecting 70 different types of cancer before it spreads. It is a groundbreaking discovery. That's on the way after this.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, it's time for Health Watch, and this is a fantastic, amazing discovery. Scientists have revealed a blood test that takes less than 2 minutes, which could potentially detect nearly all signs of cancer in its early stages. Now, TrueCheck can reportedly provide more accurate results compared to other tests on the market. Doctors are hoping that these tests will become part of standard screening over the next decade to help practitioners identify cancer way before the symptoms emerge. Research showed that these tests could identify more than 90% of cases that were non-metastatic. Now, that simply means that they haven't spread to anything else. And currently, these tests are available privately, but come with a hefty price tag. But they are available. I'm joined now by Chief Executive Officer at the Cancer Screening Trust, Frank Hogarty. Frank, this sounds absolutely fascinating. Could you tell me a little bit more about this particular test?
Sure, Nana. Thank you for having us on, inviting us on. It's nice to be sharing some good news in this world where there's so much doom and gloom. But basically, this test, you've captured it very, very well in your intro. It is amazing. It is revolutionary. The key thing is that it's catching cancer early. This is the whole key point. If we can catch cancer at stage 0, 1 and 2, which TrueCheck does, then we have got a much greater chance of saving lives and improving the treatment and the diagnosis that people have. That's basically it in a nutshell.
Now, there are other tests, but why is this one so much better than the others?
The difference between this test and others, this test has been around for some time in the US and Germany and India. It's only recently come to the UK this year. The difference is in the accuracy and the sensitivity of it. You can imagine that most of these tests, you really want to make sure that you're not getting false positives or false negatives, and that you're able to tell the tissue or organ of origin, which is crucial. If you can tell where this cancer currently is and currently lies, and that it's at such an early stage, you've really got a greater chance of survival. I mean, the rates jump up incredibly high.
Wow, so the test will tell you the organ of origin, so where the cancer's coming from as well. Is that what you're saying? Wow.
Exactly.
Wow, that's
So
incredible. So how much? So it's amazing that these tests are available elsewhere and they've only just come here. How much does it cost then? Because some people listening now will be thinking, well, I don't care what it costs, I'm prepared to pay it. If it can be done privately, how much does it cost?
Sure. Well, you can have the test through us, the Cancer Screening Trust. We have a clinic in London. The price for that, the cost of that is £1,250. And I know that a lot of people will say initially, wow, it's a blood test, it's a couple of minutes. And we can come on to that in a second. It's not actually a couple of minutes. But what you really have to bear in mind is everything that goes behind that test. There's the initial consultation with our doctor online, the taking down of the medical questionnaire, the family history, the risk profile of that person. That's even before the blood is taken.
Well, in a way as well, you're getting news that could be quite life-changing for you, so I think you need to sort of prepare people. So is it possible to get these tests on the NHS, though? Because it sounds like, although they probably won't be willing to do it for everybody, is it possible?
This is something that we're looking at. I mean, two things. One, we are hoping that if we can get the numbers involved, if we can have enough people, then obviously we can bring that cost down. This is early stages. But secondly, yes, we would certainly be looking to get this into the NHS because it compares so favourably with any test that they're looking at. They're currently trialling the Grail test, as you probably know, the Gallery test in the NHS. They're trialling that with 140,000 people. We are in discussion with the NHS, initial discussions, and we're being helped greatly by University of Exeter. Professor Chris Hyde is helping us. We're preparing a case to take to the NHS regionally and then nationally to get this out as soon as possible because it's going to save lives. As simple as that. It will save lives.
Yeah, save lives and it'll save money. Frank, thank you so much for bringing us wonderful news. That's Frank Hoggerty. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Cancer Screening. Well, in our other health news, there's a backlog of over 2 million cancer patients in the NHS with a shortage of pathologists. People cannot get the diagnosis they need. Joining me now is pathologist and Chief Medical Officer for Diagnexia, Professor Ranjan Chetty. So what does a pathologist do?
Well, a pathologist is all sort of capturing term for medically qualified doctors who examine all facets of disease. And referable to the point that you've raised is that we also make diagnoses of cancer cases. So the tissue that is taken from patients is sent to us as pathologists, and we make the diagnosis of definitive diagnosis of whether there's a cancer there or not. And therefore, the patient's further treatment and management is based on what we say.
So how bad is it then? Because, you know, there's shortages of loads of things, but what's this really causing?
So, yeah, absolutely. I think in the NHS there is an acute shortage of pathologists. It does vary from trust to trust. I think the larger academic centres are reasonably well staffed, but some of the more peripheral hospitals struggle to have their full contingent of pathologists. And this impacts on the patients, obviously, because as I mentioned earlier on, the clinicians wait for the pathology report to base their treatment on. So it's a very critical, fundamental aspect of patient care. And of course, because it's a non-patient facing specialty, hence patients aren't aware of the importance of pathology and the role of pathologists in making their diagnosis.
Well, listen, Ranjan, I'll talk to you forever, but we haven't got enough time to carry on. But what I will say is there any pathologists watching now? Come on, we need you. Ranjan Chetty, thank you very much. He's a pathologist and the Chief Medical Officer for Diagnexia. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. More in the next hour. So it's just gone 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome on board if you've just joined me. It's a great time to be here on GB News because we've got so much still to come in the next hour. And for this hour, my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. And at the top of the hour, Friday Focus. I'll be shining a spotlight on the NHS and its spending and looking at, Marc Francois will be joining me. We'll be discussing how on earth they're spending our money. It's one that you don't want to miss. And for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time we revisited using cruise ships to process migrants? All of that after this.
Good afternoon, it's 5 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. A series of planned rail strikes has been suspended. 3 days of industrial action by RMT members was due to begin tomorrow, but the union says it's secured the promise of a pay offer. The RMT says it's now entering a phase of intensive talks and the dispute is ongoing. It still plans to reballot members on new strikes, with the results set to be published on the 15th of November. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, as many as 4,000 people were being held at the facility in Kent, when it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. Number 10 says the Home Office is looking at what more can be done about capacity at the processing centre. The Northern Ireland Secretary says there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February. A new energy scheme that pays households to cut their electricity use during peak times has been revealed. The new demand flexibility service has been given the approval by energy regulator Ofgem and will run until March next year. The National Grid says a typical household could save up to £100, but a smart meter is needed to take part. The scheme is also being put into place to avoid blackouts this winter. Strike action by hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport could affect football fans heading to the World Cup in Qatar. The Unite Union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. They include ground handling and cargo staff. The World Cup kicks off in just over 2 weeks' time, and the union says it expects Qatar Airways to be hit heavily by the action. Kevin Hall, regional officer at Unite Union, says there's no point to striking if it isn't effective.
I think it's unreasonable to expect our members to be able to achieve an inflation pay rise. Because let's be perfectly honest about it, even if they were to achieve that sort of pay rise and keep their pay in line with inflation, it will do nothing at all for the cost of living crisis that is affecting them. With the energy bills, the food, petrol, it will do nothing.
Twitter continues with its mass sackings as part of its major restructuring under new owner Elon Musk. Reports suggest as many as half of the firm's global workforce could be laid off as part of cost-cutting measures. Employees have been told they'll receive an email today telling them whether or not they've lost their job. Offices have been temporarily closed and the access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as the company tries to cut costs by £1 billion annually. Pakistan's former Prime Minister says he'll resume his anti-government protest despite yesterday's assassination attempt. Imran Khan, who was shot in the leg, claims 2 gunmen were behind the attack. Speaking from a hospital in Lahore, he said 1 person was killed and 11 others suffered gunshot wounds. The Prime Minister has told a COP27 reception there'll be much more human suffering if climate change continues to ravage the planet. King Charles hosted the event at Buckingham Palace, inviting more than 200 people, including business figures and environmentalists. The reception comes ahead of next week's summit in Egypt, which the King will miss, but Rishi Sunak is now attending after a U-turn. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon, this is GB News. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. Joining me today, it's Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Still to come, each Friday at 5, I put the spotlight on a particular guest or a subject matter in Friday Focus. Today, I'm looking at the NHS. Now, the Public Accounts Committee, they took senior health officials to task over long patient waiting lists, as well as NHS spending. I'll be speaking to Conservative MP Mark Francois, who was on the panel, grilling the department over the way it's dealt with patient care since the pandemic. And on that panel, Amanda Pritchard is there. She's head of NHS England. And for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time we revisited using cruise ships to process migrants? Migrants could receive up to £6,000 in compensation following their alleged unlawful detention at Manston Asylum Processing Centre. But is there an alternative option to processing? Now, the idea of using disused ferries and cruise ships to house migrants has been floated around in the past, but is it time to revisit this as a viable option? Tell me what you think. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, so now it is time for Friday Focus. I'm asking you, who is in charge of our NHS? Now, on Thursday, the Public Accounts Committee questioned CEO of NHS England, Amanda Pritchard, and other senior officials on their new integrated care systems, otherwise known as ICSs. Now, a set of major reforms which are designed to deliver healthcare in a way which brings together the NHS and local government to provide a better service for us, the people. Now, the senior health officials were held accountable for delays in providing information to the House, not acting enough in enough time, or not acting enough to deal with the surge in demand for health and social care since the COVID pandemic, as well as being asked who runs the NHS.
Who is in charge of the NHS?
Do you mean for the NHS as a arm's length body? That's me.
Right.
Or do you mean who am I accountable to?
No, I asked you who was in charge. That's you.
Yes.
Not ministers. Thank you.
The accountability arrangement is very clear. It's to Parliament, to government, and that's why we work so closely.
They say in quiz shows, we'll take your first answer. Thank you very much.
Yes, but you also have to recognise where the accountability lies.
I think, if I may say so, I think you've just given the whole game away.
No, Mr. Francois, but I think it is.
Well, that doesn't say a lot, does it? So on today's Friday Focus, I'm asking who is running our NHS. I'm joined now by Conservative MP Mark Francois. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. Now, I'll tell you what, I watched that entire meeting for over 2.5 hours. It was a stellar performance on your behalf, and I'm very pleased you were there to ask the questions that I wanted to ask. So for the benefit of our viewers, in layman's terms, can you explain what are the integrated care systems and what purpose does it aim to serve? Because that was what the whole sort of question was, and we were trying to find out what it was doing.
Well, Nana, thank you for having me on, and thank you for your kind compliment. But the PAC is an all-party committee with a very good chairman in Meg Hillier, and we took turns to grill the chief executive of NHS England, Amanda Pritchard, and the permanent under-secretary at the Department of Health and Social Care, Sir Chris Wormold, about the operation of the NHS. And we asked some probing questions because that's our job, just to explain to your viewers. The job of the Public Accounts Committee is to scrutinise the spending of all government departments and to make sure that the money is spent, taxpayers' money, is spent as Parliament intended it. And it was the NHS's turn on this occasion. Now, so that was what was going on. The integrated care systems is a new reorganisation of the NHS at ground level. And the theory is that you will more integrate the NHS with local government social services and, to provide a more seamless service, if you like, in order to address issues like discharging people who are medically well from hospital but who haven't got a care package in place. That's the theory of it. And what we were doing for 2.5 hours was, we were pressing to test to examine how well that actually works in practice.
Now, now, you did sort of question them quite heavily, and I'm glad you did, because some of the questions that were asked, especially with regard to dentistry and also with regard to things being implemented, and I noticed when I was watching that what struck me was that it was difficult to get straight answers. I mean, in particular, when they were being asked with regard to removing the cap in terms of dentists and appointments that people couldn't get hold of and stuff like that. And I also noticed at the very beginning of the meeting where they were asked with regard to why some of the information was actually handed in not on time, so that the accounts PAC could actually investigate it.
But yeah, what was going on there was when the PAC produces a report with recommendations from how a department can improve their spending, they have to reply in what's known as a Treasury minute. In other words, it's their answer to the criticisms. And the reason that Meg was giving the Permanent Undersecretary such a hard time was simply that the Department of Health and Social Care was slower in coming back with their responses than just about any other department in Whitehall. And I think the Permanent Undersecretary sort of got his tactics wrong, and he tried to sort of, not really give a very convincing reply, and Meg's quite a formidable lady, and she really pushed him on it. So that made, if you like, for quite a lively opening to the committee. But I mean, what we saw for 2.5 hours would not have been out of place in an episode of Yes Minister, quite frankly.
No, you're absolutely spot on. Well, listen, Mark, when you pushed the CEO on NHS England, Amanda Pritchard, for an answer as to when the workforce plans will be released in order to improve staff retention rates, as well as reduce the burden upon the NHS through the cost of using agency staff, this is actually what he had to say in response.
So we must have this workforce plan to explain how that pressure can be relieved. There are clinical staff leaving in far larger numbers than anyone would want. Yeah. Many of them basically go and do agency work, turn themselves almost into man or woman companies, and then come back in part-time, which is why some of the hospitals, for instance, are under such immense pressure. So we must have this plan. I'll just ask you again, very simply, when will we get it?
So we have been commissioned jointly with Health Education England to do the work on the plan. Actually, it's going well. We're engaging widely, as you would expect, because it's got to be a plan that people recognise and own. But it's our expectation that we will have something that we can deliver back to the department, certainly within the timescale that we were discussing.
Which is, can you just be clear when the timescale is? Yeah.
So we are hoping to have it finished this side of Christmas. I wouldn't want to give that as a guarantee, but certainly this financial year is what we've been talking about.
So hang on. So it might be by Christmas, or it might be by the end of March, the end of the financial year.
So the commitment that we have made is to make sure that what we do, we've engaged with widely. So doing something, for example, that the Royal Colleges haven't looked at and don't recognise that some of our other important partners and stakeholders aren't involved in, means it won't work. So that's why I'm giving you some flexibility.
You're still not firmly committing. There are people leaving the NHS in very large numbers. This plan is designed to help arrest that. You consistently, none of you will give us a date when we're going to see it. You've just given us 2 different dates. Paralysis by analysis. That should be your unofficial motto, because time and again, that's what NHS England actually does.
Right, paralysis by analysis. Can you sort of define what do you mean by that? I understand it, but yeah.
Basically, it's a phrase that comes from the military world, and what it basically means is you spend so long thinking about something and examining it and re-examining it and examining it again, you don't actually do anything. You're forever going round in circles, reanalyzing the same problem, and you don't actually end up taking a decision. So that is what paralysis by analysis means. And unfortunately, the upper echelons of the NHS are extremely prone to this. So I just want to make something clear. I've got absolute respect for the clinical people in the NHS, for the doctors, for the nurses, for the paramedics who work extremely hard and who did brilliantly during the pandemic. My issue is not with any of them. My issue is with the very senior leaders in the NHS, the senior bureaucrats, some of whom are paid far more money than our own Prime Minister, and who don't, in my view, always provide the kind of firm leadership that the doctors and the nurses and the paramedics deserve. And that upper echelon of the department is extremely bureaucratic, and as you will have seen from that clip, finds it very difficult to take decisions. And as I said, the reason this plan is so important is we all know lots of people are leaving the NHS because they're fed up with all the bureaucracy. This plan is meant to kind of save the day. So all the staff and all the MPs are very keen to see it, and all the department does is keep putting it off.
So I want to ask you then, because watching it, I was actually quite concerned that these people are in charge of the budgets, and they didn't really seem to be answering the question. Do you think that the British taxpayer is getting value for money when it comes to the health and social care?
I think the British taxpayer could get much better value for money. And another one of the problems is that you've got a large number of officials in the Department of Health and Social Care, and then you've got a large number of officials in NHS England. And there's a great deal of overlap between what those two groups of very highly paid people actually do. I mean, one NHS trust manager said to me privately a little while ago, if you really wanted to improve efficiency in the NHS, either abolish NHS England or abolish a lot of the policy officials at the Department of Health and Social Care, because you don't need both of them basically doing the same job. You only need one or the other. Not only would that save a great deal of money, it would also make the whole system run far more efficiently, because one of the things as you kindly watched the whole hearing yesterday, was NHS England kept batting things back to the department, and the department kept batting things back to NHS England. So often when you ask one of them a question, they effectively pointed at the other.
Mm. I know there was one bit as well where you were trying to get a meeting with some of the heads of the NHSs, some of the heads of the NHS within the sort of region. I think it was Basildon and Essex and all of that. And there were 6 of them, and they all pulled out of the meeting. One was ill, so couldn't do it, but the others sort of pulled out at the last minute from the meeting. And it just none of it seems good enough. I want to bring in my panel, actually. I've got Kevin and Christine, who are also joining me. Now, and I'm just wondering, having listened to that, Christine in particular, what did you make of it? Because you know, what was your view of watching that? I mean, Mark, I'm glad you were there to grill them, because otherwise, God knows what they'd be doing with the money.
Well, I was rather underwhelmed by Amanda, Pritchard's performance. But, I mean, the NHS, it's such an enormous, monolithic organisation. I never forget, in 1979, when the Tories came in, nobody knew how many people were employed in the NHS. Mark is absolutely right. It's the bureaucrats that are the problem, not the clinical staff. They didn't even know it was the largest employer in the world outside the Red Army, and nobody knew how many. Now, I sometimes wonder if things have improved very far since then. But definitely it's the bureaucrats at the top, and I wasn't aware of that doubling up
to hear the feed
has just described, which is horrendous. I mean, goodness knows how much money that's costing for 2 sets of bureaucrats to be doing essentially the same job. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's madness. And Kevin, what's your view on this? Because obviously there seems to be so much management involved. And after listening to the committee, Mark listed all the different, the IPC, the IPCS, the others. It was almost like the People's Front of Judea, the People's Front. There was so much bureaucracy. What's your view on it?
Yeah, Mark should have a word with a party that's been in power for 12 years. I agree with Mark that we can get better value unquestionably. We're talking here about NHS England with Amanda Pritchard, because Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, it is devolved. But left out, Mark, isn't it the political dimension that really who is in charge is the health secretary? We've had lots of different health secretaries recently. We're back to Steve Barclay, who was there briefly, and they call the shots. They run the department, and they've pushed NHS England slightly away, but they are in charge of it. And in those answers, I was thinking, you're right. There needs to be a staffing plan. There's a gaping hole in the NHS at the moment with no plan to retain staff, and they're going out losing talent. But you need a Secretary of State to sign that off. And she doesn't know when the Secretary of State will sign it off because you don't know what the Secretary of State will want. Isn't there that political dimension that was missing from those?
Well, could I reply to that?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Kevin, I'll meet you halfway, but the Secretary of State can't sign anything off until he's given it to read. And the problem is that NHS England has been working on this for quite a long time and still hasn't actually come up with a plan for any politician of any party to read. And you know, at the hearing, we had to push Amanda Pritchard multiple times for her to give us a deadline on when it would be finished. And she said by Christmas, and then she said by the end of the financial year, which would be the end of March 2023. So, you know, bluntly, even the woman in charge of it didn't know when it would be finished.
Which doesn't inspire confidence, does it?
Well, it would still have to be... Look, it'll be knocked backwards and forwards between NHS England and the Department of Health. And I agree. You don't want doubling up. If you can make a system more efficient, let's have it more efficient. But it'll be knocked backwards and forwards. It'll go to the Secretary of State's office.
With the Department of Health in particular, sorry to cut across for you, but you know, you make an important point. I think part of the issue is to what extent, because we made the NHS operationally independent in the Lansley reforms. I think there is now a degree. There's an issue of to what degree are the politicians ultimately, the democratically elected politicians, even if it might not be the party you favour, but to what extent are the politicians running the show, and to what extent are the bureaucrats running the show? And I think that's a more prevalent issue in the Department of Health and Social Care than in any other department of government. I'm just saying, because of the size of the budget and the amount of bureaucracy and all the endless different organisations in the NHS, there's a genuine issue about who's really running it, at least day to day. And that's one of the things the committee were pressing.
Well, listen, Mark, I'm so glad that I got a chance to watch that. We'll keep our eyes on that because I'd love to see how it progresses. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Mark Francois. We did actually contact the Department of Health for a statement, but they did not provide us with one today. However, a Downing Street spokesperson has previously said that the Health Secretary has highlighted that there are discrepancies in performance across the NHS, and we want to focus on how we further ensure all parts of the NHS are performing as well as they can, because we do see discrepancies spread out across the country.
Bring back matron, that's what I say.
That's what I say, yeah. Bring back matron.
Hattie Jakes, that'll sort it.
Bring back matron, Hattie Jakes.
Absolutely. Well, listen, there'll be loads more on that. We'll follow the progress of that, and we'll try and find out for you who is actually running the show. But for the Great British Debate on the way, I'm asking, is it time we revisited using cruise ships to process migrants? Migrants could receive up to £6,000 in compensation following their unlawful detention at Manston Asylum Processing Centre. Is there an alternative option to this? The idea of using disused ferries and cruise ships is not an old idea. It's been floated about in the past. All that after this.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation, This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 26 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's time now for our Great British Debate. I'm asking, is it time we revisited using cruise ships to process migrants? Migrants could receive £6,000 over their alleged unlawful detention at Manston Asylum Centre, with up to 4,000 people being held there for over 24 hours. Now, in light of around 40,000 migrants crossing the Channel this year, the government is being urged to be more proactive, more creative about how they do this, to try and reduce, first of all, the number of crossings, and also to change the way they perhaps house the migrants in this country. So, is there an alternative option to this processing? The idea of using disused ferries and cruise ships to house migrants has been floated about in the past. In 2020, Boris Johnson considered these ideas to try to tackle the migrant crisis. However, the plans did not go ahead. But what do you think? For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time we revisited that idea to process migrants? I'm joined now by former Director General of the UK Border Force, Tony Smith. Tony, thank you for joining me. OK, let's cut to the chase. What do you think of the idea of using old ferries and cruise ships, as long as they're obviously in good condition, and, you know, to house migrants during the processing period?
Well, as you say, Nana, it has been thought of before. This is not the first time this has cropped up. I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think it's a panacea. I think what we really need to do is understand the cohorts of people that are arriving by small boat now and channel them into the correct reception facilities. I was very disappointed when I discovered that Manston was only capable of holding 1,500 people and only for 24 hours as a reception centre. In my time in the Home Office, we had different methods and means of contact management and detention, but they need to be properly assessed and legally approved, and that doesn't seem to have happened with Manston. I think we need to be very clear about who is coming across, who is in the removable pool. If they are in the removable pool, then I think there is a case for them being detained until such time as they can be removed quickly from the country. And for those that are not in the removable pool, I'm very disappointed about the dispersal system that seems to have also gone awry, where we're hearing stories of migrants simply being bussed out of Manston and left in various places without any consultation with the local authorities or the local MPs in that area. So this is a very, very serious problem. Now, clearly we want to stop the boats. That must be something that I think most people, regardless of your politics, agrees with. But in order to do that, we're going to need a political accommodation with the French, which means we're probably going to have a much wider cross-government negotiation with France and the EU to try and get that deal, because it's the only real way that we'll stop the boats is if we can persuade the French to help us and to take them straight back, Nana. But I mean, if they're not going to do that, we need to be realistic, and we need to say, well, which of these, and we're seeing increasingly number of Albanians now, they are not the same as Somalis and Iranians and Iraqis. They don't have a prima facie claim to asylum. That's set out in the 2002 Act. Albania is not generally perceived as a country that persecutes its own nationals. They still, though, nonetheless claim asylum. They're still being treated, it seems to me, in the same way as everybody else is, basically funneled through jet foil into Manston and into hotels without any real thought about, is there another way of tackling it? Whether it's a cruise ship or whether there's somewhere else that we can commandeer that could use that. But I presided over the detained fast-track system, which was very, very good, where we found manifestly unfounded cases where we were able to return people quickly. Remember, Nana, we have got an agreement with the Albanians. They are happy to take people back, and they're even here happily helping us to identify them. So I don't quite understand why we're not segmenting people in that way.
Well, didn't their Prime Minister, didn't he sort of have a go at us and say, you know, he was not happy with what we were doing with the Albanians. He felt that we were, you know, treating them unfairly. But I'm just thinking, though, instead of... OK, so there was the idea of Rwanda, so that was sending somebody somewhere else. But instead of sending people somewhere else, what would be the problem with having an idea where they'll be housed in, say, a cruise ship, instead of Linton on Ouse, or instead of somewhere taking them on a coach and just dumping them somewhere, which is what happened, instead of all of that, but there is an actual place that isn't on land, that is at sea, but in a nice, not something in a bad condition, where they'll be looked after, processed, but also contained, so that you're not going to have people running off, because that's what happens. Some of them will come ashore and then just run off into the distance, which that can't be good for anyone. And I agree, the idea is to stop it from actually happening. But in the situation we're in now, we need to work out how we can accommodate people.
Yeah, I think the problem we have nowadays, though, Nana, is that everything the Home Office does, whether it's an act or an omission, seems to be found illegal or unlawful. And constantly we're getting inundated with lawsuits from charities. So when you can't do that, can't do that, can't do it. And most of the charities, I think we need to be honest about this, Nana. A lot of those charities advocate open borders. They don't like border control at all. Yeah. So anything we do, if we commandeer a cruise ship, there will be lawyers crawling all over it on day one. Seeing as it's been properly designated, does it have proper facilities? We've had it with Napier Barracks, we've had it with Manston. Whatever we do, we need to be very, very careful that it is lawful, legitimate and proportionate. And we need people in the Home Office that can see that and plan effectively. I do think there is an option to detain people fairly, humanely and effectively if there is a reasonable prospect of their removal. As I say, in the case of the Albanians, I think that is not being picked up properly, because I think we're seeing a beleaguered Home Office that is lurching, I'm afraid, from crisis to crisis with any real forward planning about how we're going to deal with this ongoing problem. So I wouldn't rule out entirely the idea of using vessels. That has been mooted, but it's not a panacea, and it's a much bigger problem of that. And we've really got a grip of it, because until we can get removals going again, then we can't claim to have control of our borders. And frankly, we're not removing hardly anybody at the moment. It's
unbelievable, isn't it, the situation we find ourselves in. Tony, thank you very much for joining me. That's Tony Smith. He's the former Director General of the UK Border Force. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, we'll continue our Great British debate this hour. I'm asking, is it time we revisited using cruise ships to process migrants? Migrants could receive £6,000 over their alleged unlawful detention at Manston Asylum Centre, which with up to 4,000 people being held there for over 24 hours. Now, the idea of using disused ferries and cruise ships to house migrants has been floated around in the past. Boris Johnson suggested it in 2020. Lots of different ideas have come through, but what do you think? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Before we get started, though, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Nana. It's 5:33. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. A series of planned rail strikes has been suspended. 3 days of industrial action by RMT members was due to begin tomorrow, but the union says it's secured unconditional talks on Network Rail and the promise of a pay offer. The RMT says the dispute is ongoing and it will still reballot members on fresh strikes. The results will be published on the 15th of November. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, the facility held as many as 4,000 people. It's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. The Home Office says it's looking at what more can be done about overcrowding at the facility. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The Prime Minister has told a COP27 reception there'll be more human suffering if climate change continues to ravage the planet. King Charles hosted the event at Buckingham Palace, inviting more than 200 people, including business figures and environmentalists. It comes ahead of next week's summit in Egypt, which the King will miss, but Rishi Sunak is now attending after announcing a U-turn. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome on board. This is GB News. We're fast approaching 38 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. It's time now for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, is it time that we revisited using cruise ships to process migrants? Now, with all-time high immigration figures, should the government be more proactive about reducing the number of migrants staying in the UK? Is there an alternative option to processing? Now, the idea of using disused ferries and cruise ships to house migrants has been floated around in the past. And when we kind of put that proposition forward, we're looking at the processing centres that are just inundated with so many people who have crossed the channel to get to this country that we're actually saying, is there a different way of doing this? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time we revisited using cruise ships to process migrants? Before we speak to the panel, let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Dave says, only old ones due to be decommissioned, it would give them a useful extra life before scrapping at little cost to the taxpayer. Ray says it's the best suggestion yet, practical and cost effective. Phil says, nope, the solution is to turn them around and return them to the country that they left from. Well, that would be France, and the French aren't happy with that one. Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined now by Christine Hamilton and also Kevin Maguire. Kevin, I'll start with you. What do you think of the idea? Cruise ships instead of Linton-on-Ouse, or instead of taking them on a coach and then leaving them in the middle of nowhere, actually somewhere where they can be processed, where we know where they are, so they're contained, so that nobody does a runner, but then once they're processed, then you must... limited time.
I'm very pro-migration, and it makes Britain a more diverse and vibrant country. But there is a question of people coming over the channel in boats, obviously. You've got to try and stop the sailings. You can't. And then when they arrive, people have to be treated humanely and quickly to assess whether they have a right to stay here. And the majority do. It's just we're trying to use the channel as a moat to stop them getting here to make their legal claims. But those who don't, and I would accept a significant majority of, say, Albanians we're talking about now, may not have an asylum claim because they're not threatened at home, they're not fleeing persecution, then you want to deal with that very, very quickly. Now, I'd rather the the processing centres, the accommodation was on land, but if the alternative in a crisis is people sleeping in tents or on floors, then if you have a cruise ship or a ferry and it's moored, it's not a Victorian prison hulk in the Thames from the days of Dickens. You could use that as emergency accommodation. That I could see. So I wouldn't be against it.
Yeah. And I would say in particular, it would be people who have come via the Channel route, as in come through on a dinghy. Because I think, for me, that's where I think, well, look, if you come that route, then you can go through the processing, but you must come through the processing. But a majority, people are running away.
Yeah, but a majority are found to have a legal right to stay here.
Well, it depends where they're coming from. Because I think, in particular, Albania, they are economic migrants. Now, that's not to say that we wouldn't have economic migrants, but the point is that they're not fleeing persecution. They're not fleeing anything. They're a NATO country.
The government's latest figures say 40,000 people crossed, 10,000 Albanian. Well, that's a minority. There's another 75% have come from elsewhere. Of course, the viewer who says send him back, well, it was a lot easier before Brexit because you had the Dublin.
You say that. I don't think
it was.
No.
But there was a system then. You could send. Britain could legally send them to France. Now, whether we did or not is another matter, but you could. You can't now.
Christine?
Definitely consider cruise ships. I mean, we've got to consider every option. The whole situation has now got completely out of control. And, I mean, call it what you like, invasion, torrent, whatever.
Ooh, that's bad language.
Call it
I think it is.
Call it what you like, but we have to come up with some solution. The other end of the thing, you mentioned the Albanians, is that Albania needs these the economic migrants. They need them back there. We are now ploughing hundreds of millions of pounds into Albania. We're creating industrial estates for them. We're trying to leisure facilities to try and make it better for young people to stay there because they're all leaving because they say there's nothing for them in Albania. So we are now spending a lot of money to try and make things better for them. We can't go on doing that forever.
I think we've also got to be mindful. It's why I think the language and the Barverman then getting in a Chinook, you knew what she was doing. She was using the armed forces as props, which I think is disgraceful. But we've got to be careful that we don't demonise all Albanians.
But you're not demonising.
You've got Rita Ora and Dia Lipa, who are singers, they're Albanian parents.
No, I don't think that's fair. We're not demonising it.
Well, that's what the Prime Minister of Albania is complaining about.
But that's what he would say that, though, Christine.
But what's worrying me is that for every legitimate asylum seeker who is fleeing from persecution or fear of persecution, etc., every time an economic migrant who has absolutely no such basis for coming here does that, it's like people who cry wolf over rape or something. It makes it that much more difficult for the genuine people to be heard because there's this, whatever language you use, there's this feeling growing up against all immigrants, which is not fair because the genuine ones who need asylum should be welcome.
They're just jumping the queue. They're going in a dinghy and then they're coming to this country. They're simply jumping the queue. I know people are worried. Invasion, listen. When a load of people come onto and I've read the definitions of invasion, there's nothing wrong with her using that terminology. If people think it's inflammatory, that's fine. But the point is that what she said was correct.
What we could do is we could set
up
a centre in France to assess the claims. And you could decide there. Now, some people would still take to dinghies if they're rejected, but you would be finding something like 75% of those will be allowed in. That's what the government is trying to stop. That is why it is using the channel as a moat. And it's not working.
In other countries,
the government's creating the problem.
The other countries who do accept a lot of migrants as well, they actually don't accept such a high percentage. So if you look at Germany and other countries, we accept, say, 75% of people who come that way. Other countries accept well below.
But in number, but you're only looking at those crossing the channel. In numbers, we have relatively few asylum seekers and refugees. We have relatively few. We have fewer than France. But, of course, you're allowed under the 1951 Refugee Convention, the UN 1951 Refugee Convention, to seek sanctuary in the country of your choice. So you don't... when we were in the European Union, you could say you have to go back to the country you first arrived at.
We know that, but people coming from Albania...
We blew that with Brexit.
But we know that. But people coming here from Albania are economic migrants as far as... Not a lot of them are economic migrants.
People coming from Albania are told by these drug gangs, they are told before they leave what to say. mention the word asylum and you'll be fine. So they are told what to say.
I'm sure that's true in some case.
And the idea of expecting any help from France...
That will be true, but there will other people who come from Afghanistan and Iran...
We're not talking about...
This is exactly my point.
Right, so it's just about Albanians now,
No,
is it?
It's not just about Albanians.
Just
let Christine finish, then you'll hear what she has to say.
This is the point I was making the comparison with people who cry falsely that they've been raped. They make the playing field incredibly difficult for the genuine victims.
Yeah, but
so people who come here falsely claiming asylum make it incredibly difficult for the genuine asylum seekers.
It's a pretty terrible comparison,
Okay,
though, because rape convictions are so
Oh, no, I don't want to get into numbers, but it's the same. It is the same. People, they're just doing the same.
But there are so many women
doing a massive
victims of rape do not get justice.
They are doing a massive disservice to the genuine asylum seekers. Let's stick to the subject. That's what I object to. And as I said earlier, these people, Albania needs these young
Well, they would argue that we need young people, but the point of Brexit was that we wanted to keep the wages high and get the British people to do the jobs at a good wage. Otherwise, it just pulls the wages down.
Sadly, wages haven't soared since Brexit.
Well, they were actually. No, that's not true. They were going up, but then we had COVID.
There were some isolated cases of lorry drivers and others.
We don't need
but not across the general population.
We don't need people who are coming here to man cannabis farms and drug push. That's what we don't need.
Well, not all of them are.
Not all
of them are, but it is undeniable that a lot of Albanian crime gangs have arrived in this country. But this show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome some of our great British voices, your opportunity to be on the show. Tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing today. I've got 4 of you, fabulous. Let's start with Brian from Solihull. Brian, right, so what do you think then? Is it time we reconsidered the idea of cruise ships?
Hi, Nana. Yeah, I mean, as a temporary measure that might help in a time of crisis, I think it's something that could be quite sensible, as your guest earlier suggested, formerly from UK Border Force. We have to be careful that what we do is legal and that we act humanely. And I think the real issue is the huge backlog of unresolved cases, and that has to be addressed and that has to be expedited. But if cruise ships can be brought in as a temporary measure to kind of help with this processing, then I think that it's something that we can certainly revisit. We know that actually the present Prime Minister is an advocate of the policy, and so are the UK Border Force people that you've spoken to earlier and others.
Yeah, they should. I think they should. Dr. Seshni Mudlia, what do you think? Are they in Milton Keynes? What's your view?
Good evening, Nana. Thank you for having me on. It's such an interesting discussion. I don't think we should use the cruise ships to house asylum seekers and illegal immigrants. As Tony, your expert, explained, it has been revisited. It has been assessed by Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak has also been looking at it, but it is unlawful and illegal. So I think if we are going to go this route,
Why is it unlawful and illegal? If you instead of putting you in a processing centre which is overrun, putting you on a nice disused cruise ship, it's in good condition, good order, I don't understand why that would be illegal. But anyway, listen, I'll give you 20 seconds why you think that that's illegal. Is it illegal? Where does it say it's illegal?
Nana, yes, so from the reading that I've had been doing regarding this, they said that it's illegal. We cannot house illegal immigrants and asylum seekers in the
illegals don't make an illegal. I hear you. Okay, certainly, thanks. Thank you for that. Let's go to Mike Donovan, who's there in Oxfordshire. Mike, what do you think about the idea?
I think we need every consideration. We're spending 5.7 million a day, 38,000 migrants have come in this year. You've got to ask yourself why. We have homeless people in this country already. You speak to SME people, they can't employ people within their own country because we have a net immigration policy, but not of the people that often people need. Should they be kept in ships? And I see that the argument is about keep them in international waters. And I think that's to do with the laws. It's a legal situation. I think just in the very brief research I did today, it was to do with the Modern Slavery Act 2015. Everything needs to be legal and humane, but you've got to ask yourself why. European countries aren't accepting these people.
It's true, it's true. Yeah, very true. Let's lastly go to Julie Ford. Your view.
Yeah, hi Nana. I'm pretty much echoing everybody that you've had on about this debate. I'm very sort of 50-50 about the whole thing. I can see the practical use of cruise ships. I can see from a temporary measure, absolutely. But I've got to agree with your first guest, Tony Smith, who was talking about going back to the law and actually how the process is being dealt with at the moment. And I think that's the issue. The cruise ships are a great idea to resolve an immediate problem, but I think we've got to go back and actually look at why we're in this position that we're in now and why we've got so many people who are currently unprocessed and sitting in these migrant camps. It's not right.
No, it isn't right. Thank you very much for my great British voices. Brian in Solihull, Seshni in Milton Keynes, Mike in Oxfordshire and Julie in Bedfordshire. Right, now it's time for our quick-fire debate. It's a part of the show where we discuss some of the other stories making the headlines today. Joining me today is Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also writer Christine Hamilton. Right, let's kick off with this story. Oxford Street's Christmas lights won't be on 24/7 because of the energy crisis. The iconic Oxford Street Christmas lights will be on for just a third of their usual length of time this year due to soaring energy bills. The lights, which feature 5,000 illuminated stars, and they've been switched on today, will only be on from 3 p.m. till 11 in the face of the cost of living crisis. So what do you think? Has that killed the Christmas spirit, Christine?
I'd love to know exactly how much it costs. I haven't got a slightest clue how much it costs. So I've no idea how much they're saving by each hour they're switched off. But basically, I can't see what's wrong with that. Although, actually, late night in the West End, people are out after 11 o'clock. So, but I would like to see the figures. I have no idea.
11 o'clock, they're cutting down the lights.
Yeah, I think 12 might have been better, but you don't really have your Christmas tree lights on in your house 24/7.
I do. I love it, yeah.
But you don't this year.
Yeah, you're right there. Hang on, they're harmless little twinkles. They're not going to cost very much. But the Oxford Street illuminations are probably
cost a fortune.
Cost a fortune.
Yeah, I think they just put them on for an hour at night and then switch them off again.
Get a few hamsters and a wheel and wire it up.
Yeah, very good. OK, next story then. What about this one then? When will Big Ben chime again? And is the tower restoration finished? Now, the world's famous clock tower in Westminster last echoed out its iconic chime in 2017 before the bell fell virtually silent during a years-long conservation effort costing £80 million. Do you think it was worth it? What do you think, Big Ben? My son loves Big Ben. He goes, Big Ben, Big Ben. When he watches GB News, he sees it behind Patrick Christie's head. Yeah. And he goes, there's Big Ben!
I think it's the symbol of Britain, isn't it, the Houses of Parliament. I work in them, and I've got an office just along from Big Ben, which is the Elizabeth Tower now, isn't it? But I like to stick to Big Ben now. And I think that sound, it's great when it echoes round the capital.
It is, as Kevin said, it is the iconic symbol of this country. And when all the scaffolding came off the other day, the first time you see it, it is truly beautiful. And as the rest of the building is going to be falling down shortly, let's at least keep the Elizabeth Tower. Absolutely.
Let Big Ben bong.
Big Ben bong.
Big Ben bong. Well, if you go online, though, you can get a Big Ben sort of like a reconstruction type thing, and they have these, like, to music, like sort of like dancey sort of house music, and all the bits go together, and it constructs. I know, because my son Ivory loves that. He gets me to watch it. I'm like, oh,
what
I'm
are you talking about?
It's like a little thing, and it sort of, oh, never mind.
Let's install a cuckoo clock in it. Come out.
Why not? Anyway, let's move on to Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said that he's very likely going to run for president in 2024. Now, the former president seems likely to announce his campaign on the 14th of November, and with current polling suggesting that the GOP will come out on top in the Senate. So we have to wonder whether you think Donald Trump can pull it off a second time. Kevin, do you think he'll do it?
Oh, no, please, no. I've had enough. Very probably. But he hasn't accepted the result of the last one when he got trounced. I mean, come on.
Well, he didn't get trounced. He said it was stolen from him. I believe it was.
He lost. He lost fair and square. He's lost every court case. He's got no evidence. Look, he's a threat to American democracy.
What do you think, Christine?
Well, I think the idea that he ever wasn't going to run is moonshine. I mean, it's been perfectly obvious ever since he wouldn't accept the result that he was planning to run as long as his health...
Well, maybe he might have had a point. Maybe it was stolen from him in his view. Maybe, you never...
As long as his health although you clearly don't have to be in very good mental health to be President of the United States, but he seems to be in much better order than the current incumbent, so I don't think there's ever been any question that he's going to run.
Anybody's better than Joe.
I bet you Putin wishes he was in the White House when he invaded Ukraine.
And finally, Charles is looking for a gardener to manage Buckingham Palace's garden for £40,000 a year. Is that enough with the cost of living? I think you need to think again, King Charles. King Charles III is looking to pay someone 40 grand to plant roses, trim lawns and care for more than 1,000 trees. I wonder if they get a house on the property. If you get a house on the property, then that'll be worth it. What do you think, though? The green-fingered monarch is passionate about his plants, and they'll basically be working 39 hours. Do you fancy the job, Christine? Would that be it?
No, I love gardening, but I think parts of the garden are a bit too municipal for me, but it's a great job gardening, especially in the summertime. But Charles likes to talk to his plants. I like to talk to my plants. We all thought he was bonkers when he first started doing that, but actually I talk to my vegetables, I talk to my flowers, and they respond.
Yes. That's because they like the carbon dioxide. That's all they want. They're not interested in what you're saying, Christine.
You ever look at
but that's
Charles,
not the point.
Look at Charles's hands, though. You see, he's got puffy fingers. They're like sausages. He could probably get out the secateurs and do a bit himself.
He does. He's a very hands-on when he gets time. Yeah.
Well, every morning, 3 hours, out you go, Charles.
Have you not seen the videos of him hedgelaying?
I've got a garden, a little garden. It's not looking great at all. I need somebody to come and do it. Somebody to trim the... I won't say. On today's show... I mean it in terms of the garden. Well, on today's show, I've been asking, are the middle class the biggest victims of the economic crisis? And according to our Twitter poll, 63% of you say yes. There's quite a big percent there who say no, 37%. I thought it would be higher than that. They say no. Thank you so much to my panel, Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton for joining me today. And thank you to you at home for your company. Next up, it's Jubes & Co with Michelle Dube. Michelle, what's coming up on your show?
Hello, yes, Nana. I want to talk about GPs. Has anyone recently tried to get an appointment? Good luck with that. According to the Lib Dems, if they were in power, well, stranger things have happened, they would make it a legal point that you had to get an appointment within a week. Sounds good, but how would that even work? Also, as well, if anyone follows polls, political polls, they might have noticed that Sunak is now beating Starmer. Did Labour peak a little bit too early? Does Labour represent you at home? I'm fascinated to get into that tonight. And strikes, they were due to start tomorrow. They've now been called off. Right decision, wrong decision? Does it make any difference? Are we heading to yet more strikes anyway? We'll have all of that and more to come in just a few minutes.
Lovely. Looking forward to that, Michelle. Thank you so much. And also a big thank you to you again at home for your company. I'm back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Joining me tomorrow will be Calvin Robertson and also Lizzie Cundy. And also in my little feature, I will have the Isley Brothers live. They'll be telling us what they've been doing. All that is on the way tomorrow. I'll see you then. Up next, it's Tubes & Co.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many of us having a fine Friday, but tomorrow will bring something different, much more cloud and outbreaks of rain, although it will brighten up in many places by the afternoon. The cloud and rain courtesy of this really brutal-looking area of low pressure. That itself is staying away, but these weather fronts are drifting towards us. They're not with us yet. However, we still have this little ridge of high pressure, bringing most a fine Friday evening. Turning a little chilly out there, and it's not completely dry. There are a few scattered showers over northwest England, north and west Wales, and the far north of Scotland. The showers tend to fade, and many places will be dry for most of the night, but here come the weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland and Wales by dawn. Before that arrives, it will turn quite cold in the east, with a few pockets of frost likely, certainly in northeast Scotland in the countryside. A dry start then across the extreme east to the weekend, but it won't last. It'll soon cloud over and outbreaks of rain will trickle in. Northern Ireland, though, should cheer up pretty quickly in the morning. Here, by and large, a fine day. Western Scotland also brightening up for Saturday afternoon. And parts of Wales, Northern England and Eastern Scotland will also cheer up through the day. But further south and east, it'll stay pretty glum. Not much rain getting to East Anglia until late in the day, but it will move in here. It will be quite mild, but obviously it won't feel all that mild with the cloud and the rain. That's likely to linger in the southeast and East Anglia during Saturday evening, so bear that in mind.
if you're heading out for a firework display, for example. Something clearer then arrives, but then so do further showers for Sunday. And Sunday is going to be a mixture of bright spells and showers, some heavy ones across the southeast, certainly initially, and then through the day we'll see heavy showers developing quite widely. Perhaps not many for parts of Scotland, northeast England, and here we'll see some spells of sunshine. But after a brief lull, the winds will also pick up, so a blustery day. It will again be mild, though, with temperatures in the south into the teens.
Monday on GB News. Join my new show, Bev Turner Today, from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in.